Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 13th of January. Coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7RP. Good to see you. On tonight's show, we get to know Norfolk's own Steve Appleyard G3PND. There's a new East Norwich UHF repeater on the air. And we find out who works from a shack like this. Before we change the slide from here, Tammy, can we encourage you to guess at home? We've had a couple of people enter. That's all, two this week. I think there's a lot of clues there. Would it be wrong to say that this is, looking at the slope on the roof, that this could well be a sort of Harry Potter type shack? Was Harry Potter in that radiometer?
Well, he was under the cupboard.
Under the stairs, surely, wasn't he? In the cupboard under the stairs?
Yeah.
And that's what that looks like. So if that gives you a clue at home, then don't be afraid to...
I know who it is and I still don't get your clue.
Don't you?
No.
Well, I just think it's worth pointing out that that's in the cupboard under the stairs.
Okay.
And it's a posh one. Posher than Harry Potter's was. Anyway, if you know whose shack that is, and you're on social media, obviously on Facebook or on BATC, have a guess, and we'll include it in the guesses when we come to that part of it. Anyway, first to the club news, and James M0ZAH sent us details of this new East Norwich UHF repeater. Here's the details. GB3VW. I wonder why it's named VW. Do you think that's something to do with a car or something like that? Or I wonder why. Anyway, there's the details. The basic details, it's a UHF, so the output is on 438.3875. The input's on 430.7875. CTCSS is 82.5 Hertz. And the mode is narrow FM, and of course it's a speech analog repeater. All right, so there we are. And as what James said to us, it's designed as a local community repeater to have a model on. And by the way, for those of you who know, James recently had quite a bad, nasty accident. Came off a ladder, ended up in hospital for a few days. He is at home and he's sort of recovering. It'll be a slow but complete recovery, he assures us. So thank you very much for sending us that, James. And Steve G3AVA, he sent us this story, which is something he's been toying with fitting a CTCSS tone board in his ICOM IC290D. The space inside the radio is tight, and switching between preset tone frequencies utilises the memory switch on the radio. This is a problem because there are only 5 memories in the first place, and without that facility you have to use the VFO, and it's very slow to QSY to another frequency. So, as I'm using the breakout box for the microphone and the PTT switch, his plan was to fit a commercial CTCSS tone board into the box with a 9-volt battery and an on-off switch and an LED indicator. He'd inject the tone into the audio input to open the repeater. But while discussing the project on the Thursday night 2-meter SSB net, he was unsure whether or not the radio would filter out the 94.8 Hz tone before it reached the PA, i.e. would it actually work with the CTCSS? So thanks to a comment from Steve 2E0SZD regarding an audio signal generator to test the theory, he managed to fit an additional 1/4-inch jack for the signal from the generator and get it running within a few minutes with excellent results. There's the box that contains all of this bits and pieces and the adapter. The Black Star Jupiter 2010 was bought for £5 from a NARC radioactive event at Tammy and David's QRH a few years ago. If we look at the previous slide, actually, Tammy, to go back to that, yeah, you can see at the bottom there's the 94.8 frequency. And he expects to go ahead and fit the much smaller board to the box over the next few weeks. But in the meantime, the setup does the job adequately. The moral, I guess, of this story is, you know, if you've got an older radio like that, which hasn't got CTCSS built in, if you've got access to a signal generator and a plug and a few wires and things like that, you can sort of do it yourself. It's a great way of seeing if it worked or not. So he knows now that when he does a proper board for it, that it will work. So thanks very much for sending us that, Steve. Now, as I did mention briefly last week, Tammy and I helped the RSGB produce a monthly webinar called Tonight at 8. And just to remind you really that it was broadcast a couple of days ago on Monday, and it was all about amateur radio construction. I know quite a few of you are interested in making stuff. So if you want to have a look at it, it was live, but it is recorded and you can find it on the RSGB YouTube channel. or you can have a look if you want a link for it. If you just go to rsgb.org/webinars. There we go. There's a couple of pictures from it there. Steve Hartley is very well known in this country, G0FUW. He's now chairman of the GQRP Club. He's been on the RSGB board and been a very active member of the hobby for some time. And then Pete Giuliano, N6QW, is quite a character.
He's a character, yeah.
And he was coming to us live from Los Angeles in the US. And it was really a nice presentation. So if you're interested in radio construction at all, and this is the sort of thing they talked about. So if you've ever heard of those phrases, the sort of different ways that you could make something. That's typical of the sort of thing that the talk covered. Have a look at that. rsgb.org/webinars, or just put in RSGB tonight at 8 and you'll find the webinar. Already over 1,300 people, I think, have watched it so far. Now, Malcolm G3PDH told us a few weeks ago about some new contests for this year, and here's the last of the 3 now. This is this coming Saturday, the 16th of January. They're on 80 metres and 40 metres, 1,300 to 1,700. And this Saturday, the 16th, it's SSB. Full rules can be found on the RSGB HF contest website, and NARC will be entered under the local club section using the club name Norfolk ARC. Now, another lovely little bit of light news that came in from Ken M0KJW and Shirley G0ZAA. They sent us this picture earlier on that Stuart, their son, found on Facebook. Have a look at this. I'll let you have time to think about it. It says at the top, 1 week into lockdown and the mixed herbs are no longer mixed. Oh, that was something to do, I suppose. Definitely, we haven't been bored since at all, have we? But there we are. It's just an idea anyway, a bit of fun, they said. Yeah. Thank you for sending us that, Ken and Shirley. Anything like that, you see, please do send it to us, because it helps make a lovely, interesting part to the start of the programme. And another reminder that we're in 2021, so subs are due if you're a member of Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, or you want to be a member of our club. These are the details. The details are always also on our website. And there's the bank details. We've also put a note there about the PayPal. If you want to pay by PayPal, we ask you to pay £5.46. The 46p more is for the PayPal fee, which they charge us. So we're, just a reminder, if you haven't watched recently, our special subscription for this year is just £5, a special online rate, because we'll be doing this for some time. And the club, although it has some expenses, it's nothing like the costs we normally have when the club meets. So if you haven't joined yet or rejoined, or you'd like to join, that's how to do it. And then up to the bit of the show. There's a lot of bits I don't know about, but this bit I don't know about. I haven't seen this week's Tammy's Little People. Tammy, surprise us.
Okay, here's the little people this week.
Oh, very apt. I didn't know, did I? You said, I'm not going to show you that when we did a rehearsal. So that is...
It's called Early Man. So using modern technology to make a fire.
Oh, I see.
It's a fire, and they're roasting a resistor over the fire.
Do you know, I think it's probably because I am into electronics that I was just looking at the components. I was looking at the chokes and the resistor and thinking how wonderful it all was, but I didn't actually realise what it was all about. What's that? Is that a little baby or something, or a child looking on?
Yeah.
That's a printed circuit board. I still love these. They're very imaginative. If you'd like to see more of those, there's a different one every day, and it's the address to look at is https://miniature-calendar.com. It's on the bottom left of your screen now. Lovely stuff. Thank you very much, Tammy, for picking that out. It's that time. And I will say, and I've been saying it for a little while, but we really are getting low now on shacks. I think I might have 3 left. That's all. So if you have not yet submitted a picture of your shack for who works from a shack like this, you need to do it very quickly now, because in the next few weeks, probably might just about see out January, they'll be used. Anyway, we showed you this shack last week, and we tried to give you a clue at the beginning. Have we had anybody guess?
We've had Roger, G3LDI, said that there's no Morse key.
So? There are shacks without Morse keys, Roger.
Richard M6UES, he wonders if it's your shack.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You would banish me under the stairs, wouldn't you? No, it's not mine, I can tell you that much. Tony M0TDK says the shack might be W1ZARD.
Wizard.
As in wizard, Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Did anybody else guess?
Let's just have a look. I don't
there.
think we have had any other guesses at the moment.
No?
On there.
Okay. Well, I thought the reputation would do it, and also the little clue that we did add, which is that if you ever had a breakdown, this person might be the person to call, because the person who's shacking...
Hang on a minute, because haven't you got some guesses to
Oh,
read
sorry,
out?
yeah, you're right, I'm sorry. I'll tell you, you tell me what to do. You're the director, go on, far away.
So, John, G3PND, I've seen that pink shack under the stairs before. I think it's home to Nigel, 2E0NLK.
And Malcolm G3PDH said, based on your clues and one or two things on the picture, I'm guessing that tonight's shack is Nigel 2E0NLK.
We have actually had another couple of guesses at the moment.
Yes.
So Paul G3VPT, that would be the shack of Nigel, 2E0NLK.
Did we allow that at this moment?
And Paul says Nigel. So, whose is it?
Well,
Do you think?
since it's 4-1 or 4-0, Nigel, it is Nigel.
Nigel, 2E0NLK.
And it's brilliant to see how much you can fit in a relatively small space. You've got, look, 2 rotators up there as well. Brilliant.
Oh, we've had Steve G3EVA saying he thinks it's Nigel as
Right.
well. So because of the time difference, we'll allow that.
Well, yeah, I guess so, because they're watching it a little bit behind time. All right, well,
Yeah.
thank you very much to all of you who entered, either by email of this or by live tonight. So now it's time, and thank you, Nigel, by the way, for sending us that picture as well. So now, on our last shacks, as I said, I'll just say that one more time. So if you haven't got in yet and you think, oh, he's got plenty of time, we really are on the last few now. But let's have a look at this week's shack and who works from a shack like this. Now, I'm not going to give clues to this, at least not yet, because I know it's easy for us because we kind of know, but there's lots of clues on that page. It's a very clear picture as well. As always, we'll be putting this picture on our website and in the newsletter, so you can have a really close-up view then and take a bit of time. But there's so many clues on there, I'm not going to tell you whose it is. I'll give you any clues, rather, whose it is. If you know, though, whose shack that is, just give you a little bit more time to look at it, then as usual, you drop us an email to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com. Let us know by 3 o'clock next Wednesday who you think it is. And if you're looking at it now and you say, I know whose that is because of those clues, do it now. Then you won't forget. Radio@dcpmicro.com with the clues. And we need them by 3 o'clock next Wednesday at the absolute latest. And then, of course, we'll include them on next week's show and let you know whose that is. And one more time, if you have a picture of your shack, you want to share it with everybody as a guest, please let us have it soon because we'll be starting a brand new competition once that's done. And finally, really, just to... Oh, yeah, we're going to tell you what's happening next week. Monday, we've got our informal NARC net on GB3MB with Steve G3EVA hosting at 7:30. And on Wednesday, here in a week's time, on 20th of January, well, we're calling it an interactive night. And we thought that what might be quite nice, especially having just had Christmas, you've probably had something for Christmas that you've unwrapped. What about unwrapping it for NARC members here? It can be radio or electronics related, or even something completely different. It all started because a few weeks ago I did an unboxing of a Raspberry Pi. It was just an idea really to do, and we just thought it might be a nice fun thing to do. Now this is where I admit, and this is the truth, my wife bought me a lovely present this year. I had heard of it, I didn't know she was buying it for me, and it's this. Now I don't know if you've ever heard of this. If we go on camera 1 actually, Tammy, I can probably show you a little bit closer up. So there we are. Have you heard of one of these? It's called Train Tracker. Okay, and that's the website there. And I know what it is. I have opened the lid, but I have not tried it at all. Okay, so this is what the unboxing will be all about next week for me. This is me sharing my present from Tammy, which I had for Christmas, but we haven't had a moment to actually try it. But it will get used, it will get tried next week. We've just got to work out what I need to do here to show you. We'll set up a camera and things to do it. You promised to get something as well to unbox?
I'll find something, but the thing is, with most of my stuff, I actually do open them when I get them.
I know, Tam.
So,
please.
So
They're
most
watching.
of my stuff is
I know,
has
your
been
Christmas
unboxed.
present. I know, and this is our main Christmas present. And I was really thrilled to get it because I'd seen it come up on Facebook or some advert or something like that, what this is. I'm not going to say too much about it, except it's an interactive London Underground map. It's all electronic and everything, and it's, I believe, live. It should pick up, live underground where trains are going and everything. So you can imagine, for me, this is a delight. But it has set, but just be honest, it's sat on the end of the kitchen breakfast bar since Christmas Day, or the day after Christmas Day, when we actually opened our presents. And so I haven't had a chance to open it. So I'm going to share that with you next week. I hope you will do the same for us as well. Because we've already had one sent us, actually. Ken, didn't he?
We have, yes.
Ken M0KJW.
Looks very good.
It does look very good.
Yep.
He's just done a video. We can tell you how to send us a big file like a video if you want. So if you don't want to do it live, you can do it that way. You can just send us a couple of pictures and tell us about something that you've unboxed. And by the way, you can, I know most of the unboxing is normally done live and you've never opened it before. It's fine if you've already seen it or even started it or whatever it is. It's absolutely fine to do that. It's all about just sharing with everybody else, this really. And the other way you can do it, though, is join us, can't you, Tammy? This you've I'm sure now seen before. We do these interactive evenings, thanks to Sunny and BT for letting us have the software for free to do this with. So hopefully you might join us next week. Either you can just join us, and hopefully there might be something you can unbox, or just share with us something that you've had recently which you're very impressed with, whether it's something electronic or radio, or whether it's some kitchen gadget or something like that that would interest others.
Yeah, Ken, on his, actually, he had already unboxed it and started making it a little bit. So, but that's fine.
Well, because he didn't know even about it until last week.
No, that's right.
So it is absolutely fine. Well, it's all about revealing, really, and sharing with everybody else something that you have got. And hopefully that'll be fun. And I am looking forward to trying that. I'm going to rely on you, though, because you bought it for me, so you know what it needs to use it and to plug it in, if it needs a power supply, batteries. I actually don't know that even.
Okay.
All right. And so can I give that as safe custody for you?
Thank you. Give it back to me. And
let us know next week. Hopefully that'll be a lot of fun. So, but we do rely on you to do it. So pictures, words if you wish, instead emailed, or videos, or join us live. Should be a really good week. That's what we're doing next Wednesday, 20th of January. And of course, all the regular bits and pieces, one of the last two shacks as well. And any of your stories, please send us to this address, the usual address. It's radio@dcpmicro.com, same address for the shack, or for anything else for next week's show as well. We look forward to hearing from you. By the way, we'll let you know details as well of how, on the newsletter and on the website, of how you can join us live. There'll be a link that you can click on with there. And of course, we always try and publicise all of the radio events that are happening around Norfolk in terms of nets and places that you can join in. Norfolk on the Air, this slides on our website all the time. We'll keep it updated. We need to add, actually, the repeater, that new repeater that James sent us. That's a nice thing to do. So if you have, it doesn't matter whether it's anything to do with Norfolk Amateur Radio Club or anything, we're just acting as a sort of host for this. So whatever clubbing that you can see, we've got Bitten DX there, we've got a Clark net there for Kings Lynn. If you have a net that you'd just like to share with other people in Norfolk, or further afield even, let us know and we'll add it to that slide. And you can find out more details, you can see that and also more details about our club by going to this address. This is our web address, www.norfolkamateurradio.org, for all details about the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. And finally, always mention it, this week we sent 4, I think, of these out, cards to share with someone who's maybe not feeling very well, who are ill, or they've got a birthday or something like that. Just if you want the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club to say hello to them, then we will be happy to send one of these cards. Just drop us a line with their name and address and what it's for on that usual email address, and we'll be happy to share it. So now we've reached the part of the programme where it's what we call our main event. And roughly once a month, we try and do one of these things called Getting to Know. It's getting to know somebody who's got an involvement in amateur radio. And normally, so far, we've been dealing and interviewing people who are further away than Norfolk. But tonight, it's a real pleasure to welcome one of our Norfolk own G3PND, Steve. Steve, good evening.
That's a shock. I can see myself.
You can.
Good evening, David. Good evening, Tammy, and belated Happy New Year to you. You didn't tell me I was going to be sitting watching myself all evening. That was going to be
Well, you
very...
won't, no, but you'll be seeing what everybody at home sees. That's the key thing, I think. And at first, we're going to do this. So, as we're going to learn, you have led a really interesting life, and I'm not going to spoil any of that for telling you. So, I don't know if you'd like to start, maybe though, just by telling us how I got to hear about this. I mean, it was actually a mutual friend of ours, Malcolm G3PDH, who said, you ought to talk to Steve. He's led quite a life. I don't know. Do you want to start by just talking briefly about this book that you sent to me?
Yes, and I can start talking briefly also about Malcolm, because the book is called 60 Years of Work and Play, covers my ages from 13 to 73, and it covers my work and my play, and in many ways they're both the same thing. To me, work was always play. But it covers also 60 years of doing radio with Malcolm. No prizes for which was me at 13 and which was me at 73, which was 2 years ago. And so at 13, I started my first job, which was a delivery boy riding one of those delivery bikes on a Saturday morning for a local off license. And I suppose I got in to amateur radio because I got a first crystal set and got fascinated with shortwave listening. So the reason for doing the memoir, well, I suppose everybody has the idea of it sometime, but a couple of things prompted it. One was the lockdown, and that gives you time. And the other, a couple of years ago, I'd had a diagnosis for motor neuron disease, which sort of focuses the mind and it makes you look back a bit and think about things. And the other is we've got lots of children between us. We've got 6 children, 11 grandchildren, 6 great-grandchildren. So I thought, well, they could perhaps might be interested in reading what this old man got up to in his life. So all the things sort of came together, and it was sort of published about 6 months ago. So, but it was great fun doing it, and looking back over these 60 years.
Yeah. Well, it is going to be a fascinating story, Stephen. I'm not going to keep interrupting, but I will just mention to anybody at home, if you have any questions or points or anything, we may interrupt Steve during the talk, but more likely we'll ask them afterwards, any questions at least. But if you do think of anything during this sort of interview stroke talk, then please do so on either Facebook or on BATC. And obviously the pictures and things we're going to be showing are all from your book, aren't they, Steve?
Yes.
So I'll leave it with you at the moment, but I'll interject a little bit if it calls for it. But I don't want to spoil the story. So over to you.
Well, okay. Well, if you could show number 2 of the photographs, which sort of introduces the beginning of amateur radio for me, which was the same as it was, I suppose, for lots of lads of my age that, as I say, we started with crystal sets, got into shortwave listening, and there was lots of wartime radio equipment about at the time, because we were looking, we were literally looking at here about 14, 15 years after the war, but there were still lots around. So I acquired a BC348, but there were 107s and all sorts of radios around at the time. So, and we literally did that. We did shortwave listening for a couple of years.
So were you licensed at this stage, Steve?
No. This would be from, I guess I had that radio at about 15. I'd sort of had broadcast radios listening to the fishing boats, the trawlers coming in and out of Grimsby Docks, which was near where I lived. So it was like an apprenticeship to sort of into radio through shortwave listening. And also getting to know other people in the town, other boys in the town with similar interests. And as I said, I met Malcolm G3PDH. We around about 14, 15 years old. He'd got his ex-wartime radio, and we would sit there, tuning through the band, seeing what we could hear. And then, fortunately, they did at the local school run the RAE course. So there was a whole bunch of us, probably half a dozen boys of the same age, that we all took our got our licenses. So this would be in November 1961. So I got G3PND, and of course Malcolm got G3PDH, and another mutual friend who's sadly a silent key now was G3PDL. So there was half a dozen of us in the town who all got licensed at the same time. But then we built our own transmitter. We built our own transmitters, of course, CW, and that was about, the one in the picture's about my second or third attempt of version, getting simply an oscillator, 3 further stages after that, running into an 807, giving about 20 watts output.
You said, sorry, Steve, I don't want to interrupt much, but just you mentioned CW at that stage. So when you started then, it was Morse a natural thing for people getting involved with amateur radio to do?
Yes, and we sort of almost learnt it accidentally just with our shortwave listening. It's, it was no big deal, really. So time we came to take the license, we were all sort of pretty well up there at 12 words a minute at least.
Wow.
But what's on the other image, this is the sort of start of my urge to write about my radio and things I did. So I wrote it up as a bit of an article about this transmitter I'd built, and sent it off to Practical Wireless, and lo and behold, Practical Wireless printed it. So that's the first of the facing page.
I mean, and looking at roughly, you were born, if you don't mind me sharing this, because you were talking about your life, in 1945. And this was dated, we can just see in the top right hand corner, it was April 1963. So you were only 18 when you wrote that article, is that right?
Well, I was actually 17 because I guess it was, they took about 6 months, I guess, to get around to printing it. So I was 17 when I wrote it.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yes. I think, it's all basic circuitry that we learned to do. We learnt for the RAE exam. It's a coal pits oscillator and a couple of buffer stages and a final output stage with a built-in aerial tuning unit.
I think you're being a little bit modest, Steve, because not many 17-year-olds I can think of would be up to really writing an article and getting it published by a major publication at 17 years old.
Yeah. What was very impressive as well is they paid £10 for it.
Oh, wow.
And they don't pay much more than that now. So £10 there. I remember it bought me 2 pairs of trousers, a pair of shoes.
Wow.
And, I kitted myself out with clothes. So
I think isn't the going rate about £50 roughly a page, isn't it, at the moment?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's right. So if you put inflation 7 years ago,
yes,
that would have and then what's obviously having this interest in radio and electronics led to thinking about work. And as I think I mentioned, I lived in Cleethorpes, and Cleethorpes in Lincolnshire adjoins Grimsby, and Grimsby had a college for training ships' radio officers. Mm-hmm. So that was a natural progression for a lot of us who were keen on amateur radio at the time. And again, not wanting to sort of, I mentioned that I followed Malcolm, who'd gone there the year earlier, as he's a year or so older than me. Mm. And I think the next image shows something of that. Yeah. So on the left, it was actually the Grimsby College of Further Education. So it did all sorts of things, from car maintenance, like these colleges do, to secretarial work. But they had a whole department which was for training of ship's radio officers. The only difference for us is we had to wear the uniform, and we had to parade each morning and raise the flag. We like to think that all the secretaries had their noses pressed up against the windows, looking at all these handsome sailors.
Yeah, I read that in your book, and I smiled when I read that. That's lovely.
Yeah. So that was a superb 2-year course, because it was just 2 years learning about radio. A lot of it hands-on maintenance work, because you know, if anything went wrong with the radar equipment on the ship, you had to repair it. And of course, every day 2 hours of Morse practice.
Yes.
Because the qualifying speed was 25 words a minute, and 25 words a minute sent with a straight key, not electronically, but with a straight key, takes some doing. So you. So, and of course, while I already, had got some ability with Morse by the time I went, all the other lads who started hadn't. They a lot of them, or not all of them, but a lot of them, come from with no previous experience.
I was going to ask you how many of your colleagues there and your peers in that class or in that group were also radio amateurs like you were.
There were certainly 3 or 4, and I did start a college amateur radio station. So and got the college itself licensed while I was there. And after I'd left, I got one of the lecturers. He got licensed, and after I left, because the lecturer was licensed, he made it compulsory for everybody to get an amateur radio license.
Wow.
Every entry.
Wow.
So that they could get some real proper experience of radio communication. Yeah. And across on the right, the bottom picture, well, the top picture is the first ship that I then sailed on. So at 18 years old, a general cargo ship which sailed from Salford up the Manchester Ship Canal and out to the Far East to the Persian Gulf. And the bottom picture is the chief radio officer, because for the first 3 months you have to sail with somebody else, a chief radio officer, but after that there's just one radio officer on each ship. You're just on your own. So that's just a picture of the radio room, the radio shack, showing the transmitter, the receiver, and on the emergency radio equipment on the right-hand side.
You obviously clearly had a very strong interest in radio before this, but did you also have an interest in sailing and ships and things like that as well?
Well, I guess with living on the River Humber, and yes, you saw ships were, when you come from a port town, if you like, there's always ships. A lot of people who sail, go to ships. It's a big fishing port, it was. So it was just the perfect job, really, to be able to do radio and see the world.
Yeah.
I mean, what could have been better? So I think the next picture shows, well, one of the things you had to do on the ship was, of course, maintain all the equipment, the radars. That's a picture of me, I suspect, posing for a photograph, not really doing any work, but I think I'm pretending to clean the insulators on the end of one of the wire antennas.
There wouldn't have been too many secretaries putting their noses up against the windows on that ship, would there?
No. That's it. And the other 3 photographs are the 3 ships I sailed on. My merchant navy career lasted just 2 years. So at the top is a dirty British collier sailing backwards and forwards. We did from Newcastle across to Rotterdam and Holland, across the North Sea. So it wasn't all quite as glamorous as going out to the Middle East. And the middle one, the next one down, that was also a collier. It's what they call the flat iron colliers. And they sailed between Newcastle and all the power stations up the River Thames, BATC, Fulham, Blackwall Point. So they got no superstructure, so they could sail under the bridges. Mm. So, and then the bottom ship is a Shell tanker. Mm. That was my last one. I was on that one for 10 months, and that's where I got to see much of South Africa, the Caribbean, West Africa. So, as I say, it was work and play in the Merchant Navy as other things I did. If you
so, you had a sort of after this point, you sort of had a change of direction. You came more ashore, I think, didn't you?
Well, that's right. I decided that this was great. I'd got a girlfriend at home at the time. I didn't think it was quite as great as I was thinking it. But I also decided I wanted to create and develop in electronics in terms of design, and not be a radio officer all my life. That chief radio officer I showed you, he'd been a radio officer for 30 odd years, and you can have too much of a good thing. So I made the decision that I would come ashore and develop my career ashore. So, but a great 2 years in the Merchant Navy. And then I came ashore and I got a job with Marconi's in Essex, in Chelmsford. But the great thing was, what they did, and I persuaded them to do, is they sponsored me to go back to college for 4 years, 3 years of a sandwich course, and then a full-time year, and to become a chartered engineer, and to get really the additional qualifications you need to really get into design and R&D and all the rest. So if you move on to the next picture, it's difficult picking out things to depict what I did, but when I got in to finally finish studying and worked in our Marconi Marine design labs, the first project I worked on with the team that was doing it was an echo sounder, which is the thing on the left, measures how deep the water is. But the picture above it shows where we were testing it, because interestingly, we tested it or used to test them on Loch Ness, because Loch Ness in Urquhart Bay is 800 feet deep. Now, there's nowhere in the North Sea that's a fraction of that. It would be pointless taking it out into the North Sea to test it, because I wouldn't be able to test it to its maximum depth. And even if you went out on the Atlantic, you'd have to go way beyond the continental shelf before you get to 800 feet deep, whereas Loch Ness is 800 feet deep.
And presumably a little bit more predictable in the weather, in terms of weather as well.
And the weather's predictable, so we would hire a local boat and fit it on it, and combine it with testing the echo sounder for looking for the Loch Ness Monster.
Wow.
So
is that Loch Ness there?
That is Loch Ness, yes. That's it, just in Urquhart Bay. So there you are. There we are, playing around on boats. So this is.
So you hadn't really gone ashore completely, anyway.
No. And as you see, I actually did some lot of other playing about on boats.
Yeah.
The one on the right is, I then moved sort of out of product design, and I was given the job or the title of head of navigation systems. And this was to look into, to be responsible for all the company's navigation products. And this one on the right is a radio direction finder. So you take bearings of transmissions of beacons. But what the picture at the top is showing is we had a project with the Coast Guard to see if we could get direction finding equipment working at Coast Guard stations, so that if there was in the North Sea somebody put out a distress call, the Coast Guards could take bearings of it and plot the position from the Coast Guards. So we did a lot of experimentation. So we're lifting a rotating antenna. This was an idea for a VHF direction finder onto the Coast Guard station at Walton on the Naze.
Roughly, what age were you there? Because you said you were responsible at that time for the company's direction finding equipment and things. So do you know roughly what you've done 4 years at college, and so what age were you around then?
Well, I was late 20s, I guess.
That seems to me, again, quite young to be in such a position.
Yeah. I had, and I do mention it lots of times in the book, a lot of luck. Just being sort of in the right place, the right time, as a job came along, fell into it, and I've never tried to steer my career, if you like. I've just always enjoyed doing what I've been doing, and then the next good things come along. So this was playing around. And what we did in this project, we would hire a local fishing boat to go out with a little transmitter on board to be our target, so that we could do our test to see if we could get accurate bearings with the radio direction finder.
Fantastic.
So, and then I think the next picture. Now, what this is, if you go back and think about the oil tanker that I was on, that was about 18,000 tons, or would carry 18,000 tons of oil, which was, but in the next 10 years after that, tankers got bigger and bigger and bigger, and so that this ship in this picture was carrying 300,000 tons of oil. So, and they were up to 500,000 tons. But what they found was that the momentum was so huge that if they touched the berth, when they were coming into alongside, at more than about 30 feet per minute, which is a third of a mile an hour, they would damage the berths. The berths, because they'd been built, and this one is at the Texaco oil refinery at Milford Haven, because they'd been built some 20 years earlier for oil tankers of only 20,000 to 50,000 tons, they couldn't withstand the impact. And it was difficult for them to judge the speed, because with current flowing in the river, they could measure their speed through the water, but not their speed over the ground. So what we developed was this. It was called a Sami, Speed of Approach Measuring Instrument. So it was just a Doppler radar-based system for measuring the speed very precisely and relaying it by radio to the pilot on the ship who was bringing the ship in. And you had to pick up the speed because tankers took so long to slow down. We needed to pick up their speed some 2 miles away, and because they needed to be, say, doing only 2 knots at that point, but the current in the river might have been 4 or 5 knots. So it was, and the onboard log speed measuring equipment was measuring speed through the water, not speed over the ground.
Oh, and how innovative was this, Stephen? I don't mean that in a rude way, but was this groundbreaking?
Well, it was. I mean, the technology. This was at 10 gigahertz. the technology of Doppler shift obviously is known, and of course this was roughly at the same time when the very first vehicle police speed cameras were coming in, and so it was using the same technology but applying it to in this application. So unlike cars where they were whizzing past at only tens or 100 feet away, maybe, here we were working with very narrow beams to get a reflection off the ship at about 2 miles away. And so it was. So I was involved on this project for a year or two. So this until it, became mature, and and then moved on to the next one, now this is what this is. This is a worldwide. This was the first attempt at a worldwide navigation system. There were lots of navigation systems like radio direction finding, the Decker navigator system, the Loran system, but they were all local. Well, I'll say local. I mean, the Decker navigator system might have covered the whole of the North Sea, but there was no worldwide system. So if you were sailing across the Atlantic or the Pacific, you had to rely on your sextant, and if the sun didn't shine, then you couldn't get a position at all. So there was always this need for a worldwide radio navigation system. And the Americans set about developing one particularly for submarine use, for nuclear submarines. Now, this system, the Omega system, it's very similar to the likes of the Decker navigator system and the Loran system, in that it's called a hyperbolic navigation system. And what that means is if you get the signal from two transmitting stations, you can draw a line of a chart of constant time difference or phase difference, and that line is a hyperbola. So if you measure the time difference between two transmissions, and you know it's so many milliseconds, then you know you're along this line on the chart. And then if you measure it using two other stations, then you can plot yourself on another line and where the two lines cross. Now, as I say, there were systems, because of the distance of transmissions, if you like, that covered hundreds of square miles, but nothing that would cover whole oceans. So the Americans came up with a scheme to do a system at 10 kilohertz, at very low frequency, because the propagation distance of 10 kilohertz is thousands of miles. And they worked out that they would need 8 transmitting stations to give whole worldwide coverage.
Wow.
So, and the other advantage of VLF is that the signal penetrates the sea, water, down to a depth of a few tens of feet. But what it meant was that a nuclear submarine wouldn't have to come above the surface. So they set about building the transmitters, but made it available for regular commercial marine use. So my next project was to get involved in a piece of receiving equipment, which is in the picture on the left, for doing, for plotting position using these 8 Omega transmitting stations. And of course, the only way to, once you've developed it on the bench, to see if it works, is to sail on a ship across the Atlantic to see if it gets you to the other side. So this particular trip the guy in the picture is the navigating officer of the ship. It was the Dart America. It was a container ship. So I sailed across to the US and up and down the coast, offloading containers as trials for the to show that the Omega system or our design of an Omega receiver worked. So again, a lot of play. Now the picture, the excerpt from the Canberra Times, the problem was that one of the transmitting stations had to be in Australia to make the whole system work. But the problem was that a lot of people in Australia didn't want it or want to have one, because their argument being, if there was a conflict between Russia and the US, and one of the first things the Russians would do would be knock out the Omega system, stop the nuclear submarines being able to navigate. So they sort of, the CND type people, were all up against it, and there was always these protests going on, and so they decided they needed somebody to go to Australia for 2 or 3 weeks and put the case as to why it was needed for merchant marine use. So I got the job on behalf of the government to go and the US, because there was no point in sending an American guy out there, because they'd say, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? So I had to go and make the case and be involved in several sort of TV debates and radio and press.
Just to check, just to check with you, Steve, you're still working for Marconi at this point?
Yes.
Yeah. But the government asked you to go and represent the industry, as it were.
I was involved in the setting the standards, the standardisation and other things. So I'd got some involvement with government committees and things on that, which I did. So I guess it was successful in as much as they went ahead and built the station, and you can imagine that the antennas for 10 kilohertz are huge.
Yes. Wow. Yeah.
There are miles of copper involved. Huge mast towers. But in actual fact, they built the transmitter, and then a year later, it was actually blown up. So these CND people did actually demolish it.
Even though at that time you were just representing it from the sort of civil side of things, not military.
Yes, yeah, but it was funded by the US, obviously primarily for the military use. Yeah. But it was a great help. It was a great help for as being the first worldwide navigation system. But in actual fact, it quickly got overtaken, and I think the next pictures show that it actually got overtaken with satellite navigation. Now, the first marine satellite system, and we're talking about the same time here, we're talking early 70s, was based on half a dozen orbiting satellites. And you got a position, you tracked, as one came over the horizon, you tracked it for 20 minutes or so for his whole path, and then you got a position, a fix from it. The first equipment was very, very basic. In fact, the picture at the top shows that we actually were using DEC PDP-8 computers, and the program was loaded in on punch tape. Very crude.
I mean, I think it's worth as well pointing out, if you don't mind me at the moment, Steve, just pointing out to people at home who are looking at this maybe sometimes on a tablet or a small computer screen, that PDP-11 in the top right, that picture, that's something floor standing, isn't it?
That's right.
I mean,
Yeah, it's a huge piece of kit.
well, the thing is, we all get taken for granted the tom-toms of this world now, which you can fit into your
Yeah,
hand. It's just
yeah,
incredible to think that a mini computer like a PDP-11, you know,
yeah.
how much space it really did need. Was it a vaguely the same sort of technology as GPS as we know it now?
Well,
Were the
no.
principle the same?
Well, it, the GPS as we know it now, of course, is getting positions from multiple satellites at
Hmm.
the same time. So this is just relying on one satellite going over.
Mm.
You know, and from it, you're monitoring just the Doppler shift on the transmission, and you at the point of zero Doppler shift is when the the satellite is at the same same latitude as you are, and you can also determine the longitude from the shape of the curve, and you get yourself a position fix. Now, the accuracy of this on a single pass would probably be about a mile, but doesn't matter too much of a ship in the middle of an ocean. That would be quite good enough. It wouldn't be very good for a car to take 20 minutes to work out where you are, and you've got the accuracy of a mile. So this system, which was called the transit system, was only ever used for ships.
Mm.
Now, I did all the trials on it for the Marconi equipment on the ship in St Edmund that's in the picture there, sailing backwards and forwards from Harwich to the Hook of Holland, just backwards and forwards. Because I didn't need to cross the Atlantic or anything. It would demonstrate how good it was.
Mm.
Now, there was not many of this size fitted on ships. Where these were mostly used, these big ones, this coincided with the timing of a lot of the exploration for gas and oil in the North Sea. And so a lot of them they were just flown out to the oil the drilling platforms to fix the positions. But the way it worked was if you were in one place, the more passes you saw, the more accurate your position came. So if you sat in one place for 24 hours, so you might get 30 passes, you did refine your position very accurately.
Mm.
But fortunately, this was at the time when microprocessor technology was developing really quickly. So by the end of the later half of the 70s, these were, you didn't need PDP deck computers and all that paraphernalia. They were literally then in desktop boxes,
Yeah, microprocessors were just coming in, weren't they? Sort of. I
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
going for my first job in mid 1970s, 1975, and they were just using things like the 4004 and the 8008 microprocessors, and it was starting to make
yeah,
things smaller then, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah. So that was fine. And by then, and really, this was far better than the Omega system. So all the ships quickly got transit satellite systems, and the Omega system really quite quickly fell by the wayside.
And were the Australians happy with this system?
Uh, well, this of course this was worldwide. Yes, I
Right.
mean the satellite.
But
So
there weren't the protests in Canberra and things that they had been for the earlier system.
well, no, because this didn't need any transmitters in Australia. This was just 6 satellites orbiting the Earth. So again, but it's great fun.
And
Testing.
you still got your boats in your life, hadn't you?
Absolutely, yes,
Yes.
yes, that's right. So then, well, the next image, I think, if I there, what I did back to my writing really, I actually brought all my knowledge together of all the navigation systems, and wrote a book, Marine Electronic Navigation. The first edition was the one on the left. This was published in 1979, and covers all the different navigation systems that were operational at that time, and became the standard book for the training of ships navigating officers around the world, really.
And were you still working for Marconi at this time?
Well, in actual fact, it coincided. It was rather strange, really, because I decided this was in 1979, and we just had our second child, which turned out to be two children, twins. So suddenly I'd got extra mouths to feed. And while working at Marconi's and doing what I was doing was great fun, it wasn't hugely well paid. Engineering-based jobs generally weren't really. And so I actually decided to move to a competitor, International Marine Radio. And so I wrote this book just as I was leaving there and going to International Marine Radio. As it turned out, I only stayed there for 6 months and moved on again. So this didn't come out until after I'd left Marconi, but it brought together everything I knew and learned. And then the second edition came out about 10 years later, and it added, it included the GPS system that exists now, because they'd actually started, they put up 4 satellites for the GPS in around 1978-79 to do experimental work. And so it started coming out in the early 80s. So I included that in the second edition. And the second edition includes radar, which wasn't in the first book. In fact, I had a couple of friends add contributions from Plymouth University. So there's a whole section on communications. But the original book had a section on communications as well. And I just checked with Amazon, and they're still available. You can still buy it on Amazon, but it's now £170, would you believe?
Wow!
But it's more of a history book, isn't it? Because all the systems except GPS are defunct. There isn't. So this is a whole book full of navigation systems that were going at that time. And so, there's still a few sales, but it's so as I mentioned, these as my family expanded and I had to focus on earning money instead of enjoying myself, I changed direction completely and moved from engineering to sales, and from the marine field. If you put up the next slide, to these products. I joined a company in Southend called MTE, Machine Tool Electrics was its original name, and they made contactors, relays, motor starters, and the product in the bottom right, industrial programmable controllers. So it's all about, away from the electronics end, now to the sort of heavy end, a lot more current involved here, and involved in factory automation.
So that's a huge change in direction, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, it was a job that, you just tend to look in the jobs pages, and this job came up, and it paid double the salary I was earning at Marconi's and had a company car thrown in. So, as I say, I had to sort of, sadly give up all the fun stuff I was doing then. So, but equally, this turned out to be great as well, because as I say, I joined as export sales manager, so I did travel around the world selling the company's products. And then with a couple of pieces of good luck, I ended up as managing director.
Wow.
Yeah, so without sort of going into that.
And roughly how long were you, so from when you moved from writing your book, leaving Marconi, writing the books, and then going into this new sales role for you, how long was before you became managing director, roughly?
Well, I joined in 1980, and I was managing director, I think, by now about 1985, I think, 5 years.
Wow.
So
that's, I mean, if you don't mind me saying, I know you're a modest gentleman, but that's a meteoric rise, really, isn't it?
well, it was. As I say, I've had a huge amount of luck, good fortune, and this is another piece of it. So this is the only image related to this company, because whereas my time at Marconi, it was good to show a lot of photographs about about the products and how they work. It's not very exciting to show some photographs of a managing director sitting behind his desk, telling other people what they needed to do. So, but anyway, I was managing director here for 5 years, and then I get headhunted to another company to be managing director there, to be CEO, and this was a bigger company. Which I then spent the next 10 years. Now, I've got a couple of images because, again, to show an image of me, this company was called Legrand. It made actually a much more domestically related product. It made all the electrical stuff you'd find in your house, all the switches and the sockets and consumer units, the lighting.
It's still a big name, isn't it, now, Steve?
Oh, it is actually the biggest in the world of what it does. I ran all their UK operations, which is 4 or 5 factories, and so what this enabled me to do, we did a lot of sponsorship. So the thing on the left was in 1992. Every year, I think, or was it every 2 years? Every 2 years, they had a competition to find the best electrician. We worked with the ECA and then ICEIC and ran this big event where for 2 weeks, apprentices, this is, would come and take part in the competition. They literally had to build a control panel and install it, and so we sponsored that event, and the winner each time would go to the world finals, and it was an event. It was called the Skill Olympics. I don't know if you've heard about it.
I haven't heard of that. No.
Well, they have a Skill Olympic for all sorts of trades, for hairdressers. So the final Skill Olympics, it's all of the trades where there's apprenticeships have the finals. So there's a picture bottom right, me presenting with the winner. I don't know whether you're watching, Kevin, but that could have even been you participating. And the one on the right, our main customer base here was electricians, sold through electrical wholesalers. So I was chatting to our publicity people and saying, we'll do a survey, let's find out what the biggest interest is of electricians. And the feedback was fishing. So the bottom line was we ended up in 1994 sponsoring the World Angling Championships, which was held at Home Pier Point near Nottingham. So it was the Legrand 41st World Freshwater Angling Championships. And the guy in the picture there is Bob Nudd, because it was an amazing 2 days weekend of these championships. And England won the team trophy, and Bob Nudd was world champion. I mean, it was truly a absolutely amazing weekend. And we had an event the week before when any electrician in the country who wanted to come and fish with the England team could come and do that. So, this is just... And one of my sons was into fishing at that time, so he came and joined in.
Were you missing, if I can ask you to think about then, 92, 94, were you missing the very much hands-on development and design and things like that you used to do at this time?
I guess not, because I was... I think, I found the challenges of the opportunity to do lots of different things. I think I enjoyed that. I guess what I was missing is, perhaps I should have mentioned, is that I sort of wasn't involved in amateur radio, because right from even my time at Marconi's, I did belong to the Chelmsford Amateur Radio Club for a while there, but basically, when you've done radio electronic stuff all day at work, you've got a young family at home, you've got everything. In the end, it gets the desire gets taken away, and the time to do it gets taken away, if you like.
Yes.
So, at this time, I got no involvement in amateur radio. Well, that's not strictly true, as it will show shortly. But in the 20-odd years previous to this, then I had no involvement. I was just about to get some involvement at this point, as you will see later. So if you go to the next slide, I've just so the top two pictures relate to the World Angling Championship. That's me presenting Bob Nudd with his trophy for becoming world champion. And the picture on the right is some of the crowds who came. You'd think that it wasn't exactly a spectator sport.
No, that's what I was thinking.
Fishing.
Yeah.
But it was amazing. They didn't sit there doing nothing for more than 2 or 3 minutes. It was all action, and it was just amazing.
I just thought as well that, Steve, that also meant that you were still involved with the sea in a way, weren't you, yourself?
The bottom couple of pictures was we built a new factory to make switches and sockets in Birmingham, and Princess Anne there came along to open it. And the picture bottom right is showing Princess Anne a compression molding machine. I must admit, she was amazing. She came. I was quite concerned about having to look after her, be in her company for sort of show her around for 2 hours. But she'd done her homework. She was asking the most intelligent questions. Like, is this compression molding or injection molding? Somebody had briefed her. Well, and once she knew there was no reporters, no photographers there, she was so relaxed. So it's another just a highlight. I mean, from this 10 years, it was just picking a couple of highlights, because it was, again, just great fun, really. It was, business was good. It was the 90s were a pretty buoyant time, I guess, for business.
Steve, just to take you just slightly aside, because you've mentioned that word fun quite a lot, and this is in connection with work, and I think if I can make a generalisation, I think a lot of people probably wouldn't describe their life as fun. At work. And so it seems to me you have, is this part of the magic for you, do you think, is part of the fact why you were so successful is because you had fun doing your work?
Well, yeah, possibly. I was just lucky in what I ended up doing, I suppose. As I said, I've called it 60 years of work and play, but had difficulty differentiating the work from the play and saying, well, this bit was work and this bit was play. So what's the next slide? Where are we in the... Now, as I said, I'd had no involvement in amateur radio, and I was just... And one of my sons in the picture here on the left, Will, he just mentioned he'd been involved in CB radio, and that's fine. And then he suddenly announced, he said, I'm going along with my mate to the Colchester Amateur Radio Club, and I'm going to become a radio ham, you see. And now, he didn't actually know that I'd got a license.
Wow, really?
He was 14. I'd not done any amateur radio or anything to do with amateur radio. And I didn't actually say anything to him. I thought, that's good. I mean, sadly, when I think back, and I do apologise in the book, I think, for him to say, I'm sorry I didn't give you a bit more time. Because I was just away. The one thing, my job as CEO, I was away, 5 days in Monday to Friday, just doing so much stuff that...
So that suggests then it was in his genes then.
Well, almost. So he then brought along, I've got my license, I'm 2E0 whatever, and then he became G7 VGF. So I said, at that point, great. I said, I didn't tell you before, but I'm G3PND. And I said, I'll tell you where we'll go. We'll go off to Martin Lynch on a shopping spree.
Yeah.
And I said, your bedroom will become our shack. So that's his bedroom.
I bet he couldn't have believed it, Steve, though, surely.
I know. So there are, you can see there's a couple of straight keys in the picture on the right. I hadn't, because, of course, I had to sort of come back into it from, what I could pick up my Morse again. So I'd never used a paddle before. So that's his bedroom, and we did amateur radio together then for the next few years.
That must have been wonderful to get back into it, and to get back into it with your son.
Yeah.
Wonderful for both of you, I would think. Yeah.
So the next image. Yeah. We went up. What I was telling Will about my life in amateur radio before, and of course the one good thing with amateur radio is you can quickly find where your old friends are, because you just look the call sign up, and even though you've lost touch with them for the last 20 years, or the young lads who I went to school with, so and did my amateur radio together. So I said to Will, we'll do a tour of the country and we'll go and see all my old radio friends. And so he and I, we spent a few days, and we went right around the country, catching up where everybody was. So you can see Malcolm there in the middle of the page.
On the right-hand side,
Yeah. Now I should mention that we went to the Leicester show, and I met up with Rob Mannion, the editor of the Practical Wireless, and I was telling him what I was going to do, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'd make a great article for Practical Wireless." And in fact, I just introduced myself to Rob Mannion and said, "You won't remember me, but I had an article with you in 1963, like 30 years ago." And he said, "Oh, not the transmitter." And he says,
Oh,
I said,
wow.
yes. Oh, I said, I built that as a lad when I was 16, and I built that. That was my very first transmitter. Anyway,
That is
so,
fantastic as well, isn't it?
so, so the interesting thing was when I did my tour around to find that everybody who, as boys, we'd done amateur radio together, we'd all had still had a career on, in electronics radio. The chap in the top right hand one is G3RXP. Those people who do contesting will know him as a contester. And the chap in the bottom left, unfortunately, he's a silent key, G3PDL. But he was a great friend, and he was the person who actually introduced the Reverend
Dobbs, possibly?
yeah,
Yeah.
George Dobbs into amateur radio.
Wow.
Because the two of them worked together in an electronics lab in a factory in Grimsby, and George was, before he went off to Lincoln to train to be a vicar, and Pete went off and trained to be a school teacher at the same time. They both gave up the work they were doing, and Pete helped George found the GQRP club.
I was just going to say that, if you didn't mind, because some people may not know who George Dobbs is, but it was very well known. Sadly passed away just a couple of years ago now, but as you say, he started the GQRP club and is a very keen constructor. So, yeah. That's quite a claim to fame to have introduced him to amateur radio.
Well, that's right. So, so in there is covered all sorts of different people that I reacquainted with.
And by the way, Steve, at this point, are you still working for Legrand? Are you still the CEO of Legrand?
Yes. So where's it going? Yes. I then made one further change. Still to be CEO, I was headhunted again. Actually, a smaller company in Harlow, but it suited me fine. This is me showing Alison. You can see I'm clearly impressing Alison with the products of the company. She's obviously Greenbooks. In fact, not so much as a household name as Legrand was, except they were very much a pioneer in residual current devices under the brand name of Powerbreaker. So a very nice family-owned company. That
in your book, by the way, for those people who may get to read your book, I mean, you explain why, the fact that Legrand became a much larger company, part of the Schneider Group and things, and it ceased to become the sort of smaller firm that you could be a part of, and that's why you went, isn't it, to Greenbook?
Yes. What it did, Legrand itself even though it was the largest company in the world in its sector, it was family owned. A French family who I got on really well with, but they sold out to the banks, and I didn't get on with the banks, and the banks didn't get on with me. The fun stopped.
Yeah.
So I was approached by the Green family who owned this business, and it was based in Harlow. By then, just after this, I'd moved up to Norfolk, so I used to drive down to Harlow each day, and so had my last 7 working years as CEO of this company before taking my next change of direction.
That was quite a trek, though, isn't it, Steve? Because again, in your book, you said you drove that every day, and I think you had to leave about 5 to get to work in Harlow for 7:30. Isn't that right?
Well, I did.
For 7 years.
That's 18 miles each way. So I left at 5:20.
Yes.
I'd get in the office at 7:30.
That's quite.
If I left later than that, then it would take me lot longer. So,
but at least the
but
internet
that
helped you, I believe, later on, and then you could work from home on a Friday, if I remember right. When I
was
read.
it.
Yeah.
Cool. You've read
Well,
it. You've read it.
I've done a bit of homework on it, but I must tell you that it was a pleasure to read your book. It wasn't because I had to do it. I actually
Yeah.
got the fact that I really wanted to read it and find out about
Yeah.
your life. But
Yeah. No, that was so. So that was. So we move on to the next slide. We then retired to Norfolk to Cromer, but I didn't want to be just a sort of regular retiree. So of sort of pottering around in the garden or on the allotment or whatever. Not there's anything wrong with that. So the first thing I did was walk along the North Norfolk coast, the 97 miles of it, and write the book called Norfolk Beaches, and publish it. So I thought I'd get into publishing, as my interest. One of my interests had always been writing. So we called the mini business. So this is the smallest business I was ever responsible for. It had one employee, and that was Alison part-time. But we called Red Flannel Publishing. So we wrote and published a whole bunch of guidebooks to Norfolk, and then started to publish books that other people had written. So I've shown the one there in the bottom right, From Pot to Plate, the Norfolk Crab and Lobster Cookbook, written by those two gentlemen. I'll give a plug for that. It's still available on Amazon, if you like crabs and lobsters.
And are these other books still available as well?
Yes, Norfolk Beach is out of print, but all the others are still available, I think. I mean, I've retired from this one now. I'm totally retired. But so that was my venture into publishing, which lasted 3 or 4 years, 5 years.
But you still kept writing, and in fact, more recently back to our hobby, you have been involved with a couple of books, haven't you?
Well, that's right, and of course, the thing now is, once I'd retired and come up here, then I could heavily get back into amateur radio, and of course, with Malcolm up here, that's helped me get back in and show me what I'd been missing for the previous years, and of course to join the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club was great. I mean, I enjoyed that. So yes, so I had the opportunity to the one on the left I edited. It was for the RSGB and the ARRL, which is the best articles on antennas published over a 10-year period in all of the radio magazines around the world. And the book on the right, Getting Started in EME, which is moon bounce, which I knew nothing about, but I agreed to do it having had probably a glass of red wine too many at the convention.
That must have been Mark Algar.
Which is Mark Algar.
Yes.
Who somehow persuaded me to write a book on EME when I didn't know anything about it. But what was good is that it was based on setting up an EME station at my QTH through the Norfolk Coast Amateur Radio Station, and all the efforts of the members. It's actually co-written with Phil G4 PQP, so basically the book is written as we ourselves got started in EME. So we didn't come to it as experts. We came to it as simply because he couldn't get anybody else to write it. So
he tells that. I don't want to tell you this, Steve, but he says that to lots of people.
Well,
And
exactly.
he's twisted my arm more than once and has made me promise to write something for him when I retire. So
That's right, that's right. So
they're fantastic.
and,
They
and
are
I,
really good books, actually, and
I
both
think
their
he's trying to
subjects.
persuade. I think Jim G3YLA, if you're listening, I think you're supposed to be writing
Yep,
one up.
he is. He is. At the convention, he brought it up even. So
That's right. But it's so that was the last one that I did. Moving on, of course, I've done lots of articles. I've shown these two images relating to Radcom articles. I think everybody knows, and a particular interest of mine has been the reverse beacon network and using it to test antennas. And one of the activities of the Norfolk Coast Amateur Radio Society is testing of antennas. So I produced several articles relating to that. The one on the left was in QST, which is the ARRL's magazine. A couple of years ago, they had an antenna design competition, and the theme was an antenna for a small plot. So I submitted a design that I call my compact vertical dipole, and it got a comment. It didn't win, but it got a commendation, and they published it in QST. So these are a couple of the articles I've written. And then the next one is I've written, because throughout the last 3 years, my MND has been progressing. I mean, basically, and for the last couple of years, I've not been able to use my arms or hands, which is particularly irritating because obviously sending Morse is a little bit difficult. Well, it's not. It's with the hands, it's impossible. So I've pioneered different ways of doing things, of operating radios. And so this was an article in Radcom. A similar one has been published in the States for in the ARRL's QST. And I've had a lot of help as well. The top right, the microphone, that was a product developed by a good friend Bruce, one of the club members, and it's you actually speak your Morse code. So you actually say da di da di da da di da, and it actually keys your transmitter. Oh. So and absolutely brilliant.
You were working on that when Malcolm and I visited you to present you with the committee cup a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
You were then working on that, so that's finished, I guess.
Well, and another John, another club member's made a foot-operated paddle key for me, which is good. So I can get by. The one thing it annoyingly slows me down is in contests. I can't log fast enough. I can't operate a keyboard fast enough. I either operate the keyboard with the end of my nose, not touching it, but with an on-screen keyboard, or with a rollable mouse that I operate with my foot. So that means that people like Jim, G3YLA, who I used to be neck and neck with on the CW contest, then he does beat me easily now. So I'll find some way of getting it back.
So, and that's just the logging that's the real problem there. Then
Yes, because the transmission you can do, the N1MM makes it possible to transmit, but when somebody comes fast back with their call sign, it's getting it in, it's keying it in, which is the problem. But it's all I can say is amateur radio is a great hobby to have, because I can still pursue it. I can sit here in my shack in this chair, and I'm surrounded by my radios, and I can carry on my amateur radio.
And maybe the thing we also need to share with people, which I think is your next picture, isn't it, is about the club that you have started.
Yes, well, this is, it was quite fortuitous, really. And, we're a spin-off. The club is a spin-off of the Norfolk Amateur Radio Group that used to be at Muckleborough, in the Muckleborough military collection in the Hunt. And a few years ago, we got kicked out. We tried to find a new home, but couldn't. So the few of us who decided we'd form a new club, and I said, okay, we'll use my QTH till we find somewhere bigger. And that's what we did. But fortuitously, of course, it means, whereas I wouldn't have been able to, I've not been able to drive for 2 or 3 years, I wouldn't have been be able to get to a club, but the club comes to me. So we won the Small Club of the Year, Eastern region, for a couple of years ago.
Yes.
We've got 3. The top picture on the right is operating on we do mills on the air as a special event, because my next door neighbour is a windmill, so we can put our antenna up there. So that picture is 3 stations operating on mills on the air.
And that's incredible, Steve. If you don't mind me just injecting, because people maybe not appreciate that is your garage. You've converted your garage in that top right-hand picture, and the one underneath. And it's extraordinary to see what sort of a really strong club that you've developed there. In fact, you have to kind of limit the numbers, don't you?
Well, that's right. We have to keep ourselves a best kept secret, really. And,
yes.
Because there's about 14 of us, and it's fine on a nice sunny day, because we can be outside in the garden. It's just on a rainy January, cold January, if you've got 14 or 15 people huddled inside. It's and of course, like you, we're suspended. We meet online on a Thursday. And of course, the picture at the bottom left with you and Malcolm kindly presenting me with the certificate. Yes,
the Committee Cup, and particularly for all your help with our training and also the talks that you've given over the years as well.
Yes, I do. The training, I miss that. I miss particularly doing the advanced training. Although, of course, with the change of syllabus, that would have probably needed a bit of extra swatting up, I think, to have done it. But that's fine.
But you helped explain maths. I had some nice compliments paid about you with the way that you help people with maths, because that's often the part, particularly in the advanced, that frightens people. So, yeah. Well,
so that's pretty well come up to date. I won't show you any pictures of the lockdown, because that's the last year in my life. All we do, but that's it. So.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's I hope that everybody watching, I'm sure, will be inspired and in awe, in fact, of all the things that you've done. We've got a few questions that people have asked. The first question that came up was quite early in your talk, really, about when you were doing work in Loch Ness, and Paul G3VPT, it had to be him that asked this, who asked, did you ever come across the monster while you were there?
Well, what was interesting is I think we were mistaken as being the monster. I remember going out in a rowing boat, and where I was, because we had a forward-looking sonar as well we were testing, and I went out and rowed up the Loch Ness at sunset. So there was this, and the next day in the local paper there was a sighting reported, and when I looked at the timing of the sighting and the location, I think it was me. Having said that, I am a believer in the Loch Ness Monster, so that's why I did particularly enjoy going up there.
Well, I'm really glad I asked you the question, because when I saw it, I thought, I don't want to belittle the conversation by mentioning it, but I'm so glad, and I didn't expect that answer either, Steve. Where are we? Rodney, G0CBO says this, he asked this a little bit of time ago now, about half an hour ago, excuse me, he said, that was also my career. He spent over 30 years as a panel wireman, electrical fitter, and fitted MTE products on a daily basis. Good quality products, he says.
The sad thing is, they don't exist. They were bought by the Swedish company Asia Brand Bavaria, ABB, and then just sort of dismantled and merged in with other Continental. So it was really sad. I mean, it was about 500 employees.
Yes, I mean, it's like, I guess, Schneider have taken over Legrand. You know, it's a massive conglomeration, aren't they, of companies. Also, Steve G3EVA has just written and said, Steve, a very interesting life and career. I've used many of your products over the years, he says. You've been extremely adaptable in your choices of work. Is there anything else that you wish you'd have done?
Certainly no regrets. No, I mean, one of my grandson's just about to qualify as a lawyer, and he wants to be a barrister. And I think I'd like to have been a barrister.
You'd have never fitted it in, Steve.
No, no, seriously. I guess, yeah, it's just like my son. It must have been in the genes somewhere, which it is with all of us, I suppose, who want to go into. I mean, one of my grandsons, of course, has got his license, which I trained here. I think he's a member. Or he may have let his membership lapse. I think he's a member of the club still.
I saw the picture in the book. Yeah.
M6HQY. So, yeah.
And is your son still a radio amateur? Does he still do it?
He's not active. No, except one of his activities is he actually writes. He's an adventurer and writer, and he does. He's written several books on scuba diving, and he's a keen paraglider. And of course, all the paragliders use little 2-meter handhelds. And as he points out, he's the only one who's actually licensed to use his 2-meter handheld. All the others, of course, buy them and just when they're up there. But I think he'll come back to it.
I was going to say, this is what happens so much, doesn't it, with this hobby?
He's 42, so. You know, he's at a time when I was 42, when I was just too engrossed in all the other things.
Yeah, it is one of those hobbies that you come back to, isn't it? We've almost run out of time here, I think, because it's a long time for you as well here. I've got another couple of things I could just ask. Rick M7 GMT says, do any of the old defunct satellites still exist, or have they all fallen out of the sky?
No idea. I should imagine probably the transit ones, they were low orbit and they may well have fallen out of the sky, but don't know.
Or they're part of space junk, as we hear about, I guess.
That's right, yeah.
Lots of comments and compliments, Steve, as you'd expect, and you can go onto Facebook and to BATC and have a look at them for yourself. I mean, Mike, the last one I just happened to see now, what an interesting career in life. Thank you for sharing it. That was Mike M0 TVG. I'd like to just sort of almost finish with this and just ask you. I think you're really inspirational, not just in your career and everything, but especially dealing with this illness in the last 3 years, which you still have a sense of fun with your life. Fun comes out a lot, as I mentioned earlier on. So, do you have any advice for anyone who has a debilitating condition and maybe is rather more depressed and downbeat than you? You are inspirational. What do you think the secret is when you get such tragic news as you had when you were diagnosed? What's the secret of living a fulfilling life?
That's difficult. I think the first secret is to have a good wife, if you can, because Alison takes all the difficulties away. Without her, she sticks food in my mouth. I wouldn't be able to do that. But so my luck continues, if you like. But the other is I've got so many projects on the go, and that's the key thing, just to have something that you're always moving forward.
Yes.
It's difficult to say. It just comes naturally, really, that I'm wanting to do these things.
I think, and that's what's shown throughout your life. Steve, it's been a wonderful evening, a wonderful journey. You've taken us on the journey that you started right from when you were a young lad, getting into amateur radio, then going into engineering and business, and then returning to amateur radio. And now, with your condition, it's made you work on products and ideas to help others as well, to show that you can still get involved with amateur radio even when you have conditions such as your own. I want to thank you once again for sharing your life with us tonight. It really has been interesting and inspirational, and I wish you all the best with you and Alison, of course, your wife, and thank you once again for sharing it. You really have been an inspiration, and it's been fascinating to find out about your life.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Tammy, and thank you both for doing this. I mean, that's another of the things that it allows me to do, is be part of the club and see what's going on. So,
well, it's been lovely.
Good night, everybody, or anybody still watching.
There's plenty of people still watching. About 80 people or so have been seeing this live, and I know that lots of people watch it later. Once again, Steve, thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Bye.
And that's it from Steve. I don't think there's any other words that I can add or would add to add to that. I hope you found that as fascinating a journey as I have. So that's virtually it now for NARC Live. Just to remind you again what's happening, that on Monday we've got our GB3NB net, our informal net at 7:30, with Steve G3EVA hosting that. And then next Wednesday it's that unboxing night, and I really hope that you'll join in with that in spirit. You'll send us some pictures or some stories about what you've done, or even better, if you can join us live, there'll be a link that we give on how to join us live. And show us an unboxing next week of something that you've had. And of course, we'd love to hear your stories and news and everything else as well. Do send it to the usual address. It's radio@dcpmicro.com. Anything at all about the show, we'd love to hear from you. And that's what's happening next week. And thank you once again. If you want us to send one of these cards as well, by the way, please let us know. But that's it, I think, for NARC Live, Tammy, for this week. And once again, I shall go to bed dreaming and thinking about all the things that Steve has done throughout his life. And thank you very much for all of you for joining us. So it's now from Tammy M0TC.
Goodbye.
And from me, David G7URP. Please take extra special care. Stay at home if you can. Stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.